Hello everyone, before we begin tonight's haunting tale, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the fear. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time the unknown feels closest to you. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and let the whispers of the unknown guide you through the eerie corridors of our story. Ready to face the darkness? The forest surrounding the small, unassuming town of Pine Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. Known simply as the woods to the locals, its dense canopy of ancient oaks and pines formed a natural barrier against the outside world. The place was beautiful, almost idyllic in the daylight, with sunlight filtering through the leaves in golden beams and a symphony of birdsong filling the air. Yet, when night fell, the forest transformed into something entirely different, a place where shadows moved of their own accord, where the wind carried faint whispers that sent shivers down the spine, and where local legends came to life. One legend stood out among the rest, whispered in hushed tones around campfires and told to children as a cautionary tale, the story of the murmurer. It was said to be a restless spirit that wandered the woods, drawn to those who dared to enter after dark. According to the stories, the murmurer didn't simply haunt its victims, it spoke to them in soft, incomprehensible whispers, luring them deeper into the forest until they were never seen again. The townsfolk dismissed the legend as mere folklore, a tale concocted to keep curious teenagers from wandering into the woods alone. But those who had ventured too far and returned, few as they were, spoke of a chilling presence and voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Emma Carter had heard these stories growing up. They were a staple of her childhood summers spent in Pine Hollow with her grandparents, who owned a modest cabin on the edge of the forest. But Emma was no longer a wide-eyed child. At 28, she was a city girl through and through, accustomed to the noise and bustle of urban life. Still, a part of her had always been drawn to the woods, intrigued by their secrets and the stories they held. So when she found herself longing for an escape from the monotony of her office job and the endless grey of the city, she decided to revisit Pine Hollow. This time, she wouldn't go alone. "We should totally do it," Emma said, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she leaned across the table at the diner. "One weekend in the woods. Just us, a campfire, and no cell service. It'll be fun." Liam Archer, her childhood best friend, raised an eyebrow. "Fun? You call sleeping on the ground and fighting off mosquitoes fun? You're out of your mind, Elm." "Oh, come on," she shot back, playfully nudging him. "You're the one who's always talking about how disconnected we are from nature. Here's your chance to reconnect." Tara Blake, the group's resident skeptic, sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "I don't know," she said. "I've heard some weird things about those woods. People say they're haunted." "Haunted?" Ben Michaels, the fourth member of their group, leaned in with mock seriousness. "Are we talking ghosts or Bigfoot here? Because if it's Bigfoot, I'm in. I've always wanted to meet the guy." Emma laughed, shaking her head. "Ghosts, Bigfoot, whatever. It's just stories. Besides, it's not like we're going to wander off into the deep woods. We'll stick to the trails, roast some marshmallows, and have a good time." Reluctantly, the others agreed, and by the following weekend, the four friends found themselves loaded into Emma's SUV, heading toward Pine Hollow. The drive was filled with laughter and playful banter, the kind that only long-standing friends could share. Yet, as they approached the edge of the forest, a quiet unease settled over the group. The trees loomed taller here, their branches intertwining to create an almost impenetrable canopy. Even in the daylight, the woods seemed to exude an air of watchful silence. The campsite Emma had chosen was a clearing near the edge of the forest, close enough to the main road to feel safe but far enough to give the illusion of wilderness. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. They worked quickly to set up their tents and gather firewood, the task made easier by their camaraderie and shared excitement. As night fell, the group settled around the campfire, its warm glow a comforting barrier against the encroaching darkness. The sound of crackling flames mingled with the occasional rustle of leaves, creating a tranquil backdrop for their conversations. Emma passed around a bag of marshmallows, laughing as Liam attempted to toast his without setting it on fire. "So," Ben said, leaning back against a log, "what's the deal with this murmurer thing? You said it's some kind of ghost, right?" Emma shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. That's the story. It's supposed to be a spirit that haunts the woods, whispering to people and luring them deeper in. My grandparents used to tell me about it when I was a kid. Luring them to what? Tara asked, her tone skeptical. Their doom. Something like that, Emma replied with a grin. But come on, it's just a legend. Every small town has one. Liam leaned forward, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. Well, if it's just a legend, then you won't mind me telling you that my cousin swears he heard whispers out here once. He said it was like the forest was calling his name. Ben chuckled. And let me guess, your cousin also believes in UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster. Laugh all you want, Liam shot back. But he was serious. He said it scared him so much, he never went camping again. Emma rolled her eyes, though a part of her couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. She had dismissed the stories as harmless folklore, but the way Liam spoke gave her pause. Shaking off the thought, she forced a laugh. Well, if we hear whispers tonight, I'll be sure to let you know. As the night wore on, the group's laughter began to fade, replaced by a comfortable silence as they watched the fire burn low. The forest around them was alive with sound, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Yet, beneath it all, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible noise that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Did you hear that? Tara asked suddenly, sitting up straighter. Hear what? Emma replied, her voice light but her posture tense. Tara frowned, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. I don't know. It sounded like whispering. Liam laughed nervously. All right, very funny. Trying to scare us already, Tara? I'm not joking, she insisted. I swear I heard it. Ben rolled his eyes. Probably just the wind. These trees make all kinds of weird noises. Emma forced a smile, though her heart was pounding. She hadn't heard anything, but the tension in Tara's voice was unmistakable. Deciding to lighten the mood, she grabbed a stick and stood dramatically. All right, let's settle this once and for all. I'll go investigate. Emma, don't, Tara said, her tone serious. Relax, Emma replied. I'll be right back. With that, she stepped beyond the circle of firelight, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she ventured into the trees. The cool night air sent a shiver down her spine, and the sound of her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud. She scanned the area, finding nothing but shadows and the occasional gleam of moonlight on the leaves. Just as she was about to turn back, a faint sound reached her ears. It was soft, almost like a breath, but unmistakably human. She froze, her flashlight beam trembling as she swung it toward the source of the noise. The trees stood silent and unmoving, yet the whisper came again, this time clearer. It was her name. Emma. Her blood ran cold as she backed away, her flashlight flickering. She turned and ran back to the campsite, her heart pounding in her chest. When she burst into the clearing, her friends stared at her in alarm. What happened? Liam asked, standing. Emma hesitated, unsure of how to explain what she'd heard. I didn't see anything, she said finally. But maybe we should stick closer to the fire tonight. The group exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. As they huddled around the fire, the whispers returned, faint and insistent, weaving through the darkness like a sinister melody. And though none of them admitted it, each felt the same chilling realization: the forest was watching. The night deepened, and the campfire's light shrank to a warm glow, leaving shadows to creep closer to the edges of the campsite. The four friends sat quietly now, their earlier laughter replaced by a tension none of them wanted to acknowledge. Even Ben, who had spent most of the evening cracking jokes, was unusually quiet as he poked at the fire with a stick. Above them, the canopy of trees swayed gently in the wind, their rustling leaves creating a soft, almost rhythmic backdrop to the stillness of the forest. It was Tara who broke the silence. Does anyone else feel like we're being watched? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried enough weight to make everyone look up. Don't start, Liam muttered, his tone more defensive than dismissive. He glanced nervously at the dark forest surrounding them. You're just psyching yourself out. Maybe, Tara said, wrapping her arms around herself. But something doesn't feel right. It's too quiet. Emma, who had been staring into the flames, nodded slowly. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but Tara was right. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoots of owls, were conspicuously absent. The only noise was the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "You're imagining things," Ben said, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. He tossed the stick he'd been holding into the fire and stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. "I'll prove it. I'll go take a look around." "Ben, don't," Emma said sharply, her eyes flashing with concern. "Stay here. We don't need anyone wandering off." "Relax, Mom," Ben replied with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll just check the perimeter. I won't go far." Before anyone could protest further, Ben grabbed the flashlight and headed toward the trees. The beam of light bobbed as he walked, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted among the trunks. The others watched in silence until the light disappeared into the darkness. The minutes stretched on, and Ben didn't return. The tension at the campsite grew palpable, the fire's warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over the group. "He's fine," Liam said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "Ben's just messing with us. He'll jump out any second now and try to scare us." "That's not funny," Tara snapped, her voice tight with worry. She glanced nervously at the edge of the firelight, as if expecting Ben to emerge at any moment. "He should be back by now." Emma stood, her jaw set with determination. "I'm going to find him." "Not alone, you're not," Liam said, standing as well. "I'll come with you." Tara looked like she wanted to argue but said nothing. Instead, she moved closer to the fire, as if its light could protect her. Emma grabbed her flashlight and nodded at Liam. "Let's go." The forest felt different as Emma and Liam ventured into the trees. The air was colder here, and the darkness seemed thicker, as if it were pressing in on them. The beam of Emma's flashlight cut through the blackness, illuminating the gnarled roots and twisted branches that surrounded them. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them jump, their nerves stretched taut. "Ben," Emma called, her voice echoing faintly. "Where are you?" There was no response, only the oppressive silence. Emma glanced at Liam, who was gripping a sturdy branch he had picked up as a makeshift weapon. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tightly. "This isn't like him," Liam said. "He's an idiot sometimes, but he wouldn't just wander off like this." Emma nodded, her unease growing. They continued deeper into the woods, the flashlight beam catching glimpses of strange markings on the trees. The carvings were jagged and crude, resembling symbols or runes that neither of them recognized. Emma ran her fingers over one of the markings, noting how fresh it seemed, as if it had been made recently. "What the hell is this?" Liam asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Emma replied, her fingers tingling where they had touched the carving. "But I don't like it." A sudden noise behind them made both of them whip around. The flashlight beam landed on a pair of glowing eyes staring back at them from the darkness. Emma gasped, her heart leaping into her throat, but the creature stepped into the light, revealing itself to be a deer. It watched them for a moment before bolting into the trees. "Jesus," Liam muttered, exhaling sharply. "This place is messing with my head." Emma didn't respond. She was too focused on the faint sound she thought she heard, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It seemed to come from all around them, weaving through the trees like a phantom voice. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Liam frowned. "Hear what?" "Whispers," Emma said. "Like someone's talking, but I can't make out the words." Liam shook his head. "I don't hear anything." "Are you sure it wasn't the wind?" Emma opened her mouth to argue, but the sound came again, louder this time. It was a voice, soft and insistent, and it was calling her name. They found Ben near the edge of a small clearing, sitting on the ground with his back against a tree. He looked dazed, his eyes wide and unfocused as he stared at nothing. Emma rushed to his side, kneeling beside him and shaking his shoulder. "Ben, are you okay?" He blinked slowly, as if coming out of a trance. I got lost," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't find my way back." Liam crouched beside him, his expression a mix of relief and frustration. Why the hell did you wander off? You scared the crap out of us. Ben shook his head, his brow furrowing. I don't know. I thought I saw someone. They were standing just past the trees, watching us. I tried to follow them, but he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the clearing. Emma followed his line of sight and froze. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, each one marked with the same strange carvings they had seen on the trees. The air around the circle felt heavy, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle. We need to go, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Now. Liam helped Ben to his feet, and the three of them hurried back toward the campsite. As they moved, the whispers followed, growing louder and more insistent with every step. By the time they reached the firelight, they were all pale and trembling, their earlier bravado shattered. The forest was no longer just a backdrop to their adventure. It had become something alive, something watching, and it wanted them to know they were not welcome. The campsite had grown quieter than anyone liked, the earlier whispers of unease lingering like a faint fog among the group. The fire crackled weakly, its embers casting dim, pulsing light that barely held the encroaching darkness at bay. Emma, Liam, Tara, and Ben huddled closer to the warmth, their voices subdued. It felt as though they were intruding, uninvited guests in the forest's domain. Tara's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her steaming cup of tea. Did you notice the forest went silent again? She whispered. I mean, completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Ben shrugged, his usual bravado dimmed by the creeping tension. It's just a quiet night. Maybe the animals are keeping out of the rain or something. It's not the rain, Tara said, her voice growing more insistent. This isn't natural. Something feels wrong. Liam snorted softly, though it lacked his usual energy. You're being dramatic. We've all had a long day. The quiet just makes you notice things more. Stop dismissing her, Liam, Emma said sharply, her eyes flicking toward the dark edges of the campsite. You feel it too. Don't act like you don't. Liam fell silent, his gaze darting toward the shadows. He didn't argue, and the group lapsed into uneasy quiet once more. The oppressive stillness pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. Even the crackling fire seemed too quiet, as though it too were stifled by the forest's unseen presence. After some time, Emma stood abruptly. I'm going to walk the perimeter, she announced, her tone firm but her movements tense. I just need to move. By yourself? Liam asked, rising as well. Not happening. I'll go with you. Emma hesitated, torn between the need for solitude and the comfort of company. Finally, she nodded. Fine. Let's go. Tara and Ben exchanged glances but didn't protest. Emma and Liam grabbed their flashlights and stepped out of the circle of firelight, their beams casting long, jittery shadows as they moved into the trees. The air beyond the campsite felt different, colder, heavier, and unnervingly quiet. The sound of their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the forest floor, their boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. Emma's flashlight beam swept over the gnarled roots and low-hanging branches, her heart pounding with each step. Do you think it's just us getting in our own heads? Liam asked, his voice a low murmur. Emma hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. But it doesn't feel right. This place, it's like it's watching us. Liam nodded grimly. Yeah, I feel it too. They reached the edge of the clearing, where the trees grew denser and the shadows deeper. The faintest rustling sound reached Emma's ears, and she froze, holding up a hand to stop Liam. Did you hear that? Liam nodded, his grip tightening on the sturdy branch he'd picked up as a makeshift weapon. Yeah, over there. Emma swung her flashlight toward the sound, her heart racing. The beam illuminated a cluster of bushes, their leaves trembling slightly as though something had brushed past them. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. Hello, she called, her voice trembling slightly. No response. Only the oppressive silence. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the forest, and both Emma and Liam jumped. The noise came from behind them. They spun around, their flashlights sweeping the darkness, but saw nothing. Emma's pulse quickened as the sense of being watched intensified. We should head back, Liam said, his voice tight. This isn't safe. Emma hesitated, torn between the desire to understand what was happening and the growing fear clawing at her chest. Finally, she nodded. Yeah. Let's go. As they turned to head back, Emma's flashlight caught something carved into a nearby tree trunk. She stopped, her curiosity overriding her fear. The marking was jagged and crude, resembling a symbol she didn't recognize. She reached out to trace it with her fingers, a strange tingling sensation coursing through her hand as she made contact. What is it? Liam asked, stepping closer. I don't know, Emma replied. But it looks fresh. Like someone just made it. Liam frowned. That's weird. Let's just go, okay? Emma reluctantly pulled her hand away and nodded. They continued toward the campsite, but the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees crowding together as if trying to block their path. The faint rustling sound followed them, always just out of sight. When they finally emerged into the clearing, Tara and Ben were standing by the fire, their faces pale and drawn. Tara rushed toward them, her voice shaking. Where were you? You've been gone forever. We were only gone a few minutes, Emma said, glancing at Liam. But when she checked her watch, her stomach dropped. Nearly 40 minutes had passed since they'd left. That's not possible, Liam muttered, his brow furrowing. It couldn't have been that long. Well, it was, Tara snapped. And while you were gone, we heard things. Ben nodded grimly. Whispers. They were getting louder. And I swear I saw something moving in the trees. Emma's heart sank as the whispers she'd heard earlier echoed in her mind. She looked at Liam, who met her gaze with a mixture of fear and determination. We need to stay together, she said firmly. No one wanders off. Agreed. The others nodded, huddling closer to the fire. But even as they tried to convince themselves they were safe, the oppressive atmosphere of the forest pressed in on them. The whispers grew louder, weaving through the darkness like a sinister melody, and the feeling of being watched never wavered. The forest had made its presence known, and it wasn't going to let them forget. The night seemed to close in tighter around the group as they huddled near the campfire. The weak glow of the flames did little to push back the darkness, which felt alive, breathing, and teeming with an unseen presence. The oppressive atmosphere pressed on Emma, Liam, Tara, and Ben, its weight making even the act of drawing breath feel heavy. The whispers, faint at first, had grown more persistent, weaving through the trees like a haunting melody, impossible to ignore. Tara sat closest to the fire, her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped tightly around them. She stared into the flames as though willing them to offer some kind of protection. It's louder now, she said, her voice barely audible. Can you hear it? Emma nodded, her own unease growing with each passing second. I hear it. It's like, it's speaking, but I can't make out the words. Liam shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting toward the shadows beyond the firelight. We're just tired, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. It's our minds playing tricks on us. That's not what this is, Tara snapped, her eyes wide and glistening. Something's out there. It's watching us. Before anyone could respond, a sharp noise cut through the air, a snapping branch, loud and deliberate. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. The sound had come from the edge of the clearing, just beyond the circle of light. Ben was the first to speak, his voice low and trembling. Okay, what the hell was that? Emma stood slowly, her flashlight in hand. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, but she forced herself to stay calm. Stay here, she said, her tone firm. I'll check it out. No way, Liam said, standing as well. You're not going alone. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Fine. Let's go. The two of them moved toward the edge of the clearing, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The trees loomed tall and menacing, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. As they stepped past the first row of trunks, the whispers seemed to grow louder, wrapping around them like an invisible fog. Do you see anything? Liam asked, his voice tight. Emma shook her head, her beam sweeping across the forest floor. No. But it feels close. Whatever it is. Suddenly, her flashlight caught something unusual. On the bark of a nearby tree were more of the strange carvings she had seen earlier. These were deeper, more intricate, and seemed to glow faintly in the pale light. "What are these?" Liam asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," Emma said, running her fingers over the markings. A strange tingling sensation shot through her hand, and she pulled back sharply. "But they are fresh. Someone, or something, made these recently." A low, guttural sound emerged from the darkness, freezing them both in place. It wasn't a growl, exactly, but it carried an unmistakable menace, like a warning. "We need to go back," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." Emma nodded, her stomach churning with fear. They turned and hurried back to the clearing, their footsteps quick and unsteady. The whispers followed them, growing louder with each step, until it felt as though the forest itself was speaking. When they emerged into the clearing, Tara and Ben were standing, their faces pale and stricken. Tara pointed toward the fire, her hand trembling. "Look." Emma's eyes followed the direction of her finger, and her breath caught in her throat. Scattered around the fire were their belongings, torn and clawed as though by some massive animal. Their backpacks had been emptied, the contents strewn across the ground. The tents, once securely pitched, now sagged and tilted, their fabric slashed to ribbons. "What the hell happened?" Liam asked, his voice rising with panic. Ben shook his head. "We don't know. We heard something moving. And then the whispers got so loud." Tara clutched Emma's arm, her grip almost painful. "I saw them," she said, her voice shaking. "There were shadows. People. Moving between the trees." Emma's stomach dropped. "People? Are you sure?" "Yes," Tara insisted. "But they weren't normal. Their movements were wrong, like they were glitching." Before Emma could respond, a loud thud echoed through the clearing, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The group turned toward the noise, their flashlights trembling as they illuminated the source. At the edge of the clearing stood a figure, tall and shrouded in shadow. Its features were indistinct, its form flickering like a mirage. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out the sound of the fire and their own frantic breathing. "Get behind me," Liam said, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly. "Stay together." The figure didn't move, but the air around it seemed to ripple, distorting the space like heat waves on asphalt. Emma felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her, her legs trembling as she fought the urge to run. The figure raised an arm, pointing toward them with a long, skeletal finger. The whispers shifted, forming words that Emma could just barely make out. "Leave this place." The group didn't wait to be told twice. They grabbed what they could and bolted, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they fled into the forest. The whispers pursued them, relentless and accusing, echoing in their minds like a dark mantra. Emma ran alongside Liam, her heart pounding and her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear Tara and Ben behind them, their footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The forest seemed alive, its branches reaching out to snag their clothes and its roots rising to trip them. A sudden scream pierced the air, and Emma skidded to a halt. She turned to see Tara on the ground, clutching her ankle. Ben was already helping her up, his face etched with fear. "We have to keep moving," Emma shouted, rushing back to them. She grabbed Tara's other arm, and together they lifted her to her feet. Tara winced with every step, but they didn't stop. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the forest itself was trying to force them to turn back. Shadows flitted between the trees, their forms unnatural and jerky. Emma's flashlight flickered, threatening to go out, and she fought back a surge of panic. Finally, they stumbled into a small clearing, collapsing in exhaustion. The whispers receded slightly, though they didn't disappear entirely. The group huddled together, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling. "What is happening?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma shook her head, unable to find an answer. All she knew was that they were no longer welcome in the forest. And whatever had been watching them was no longer content to stay hidden. The clearing was deathly silent, the air thick with a foreboding stillness that pressed on the group like a physical weight. Emma, Liam, Tara, and Ben stood in a tight circle, their flashlights casting overlapping beams of light that barely penetrated the suffocating darkness. The whispers had subsided, but the absence of sound was almost worse. It felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Emma's hands trembled as she gripped her flashlight, the beam shaking slightly as she scanned the tree line. The figure they had seen earlier was gone, but its presence lingered, an unshakable sensation of being watched. "We can't stay here," Liam said, his voice low but steady. He held his makeshift weapon tightly, his knuckles white. "We need to keep moving." "Where?" Tara whispered, her voice tinged with panic. "There's nowhere safe. Whatever this thing is, it's everywhere." Ben placed a hand on Tara's shoulder, trying to steady her. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his voice wavered. "We just have to stick together." Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "We'll head back to the clearing with the stone circle," she said. "It's the only place we've seen anything that might give us answers." "That place felt wrong," Liam said, frowning. "Why would we go back there?" "Because," Emma replied, "I think it's connected to all of this. The carvings, the whispers, the shadows, it all started when we found that clearing. Maybe there's something there that can help us stop whatever this is." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They had no better plan, and the oppressive atmosphere of the forest left them desperate for any chance of escape. The journey back to the stone circle was fraught with tension. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made the group jump, their flashlights jerking toward the sound. The shadows seemed to move in their peripheral vision, flickering just out of reach of the light. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing louder with each step, their insidious cadence drilling into their minds. "Do you hear that?" Tara asked, her voice trembling. "We all hear it," Emma replied, her tone grim. "Just keep moving." They reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. The stone circle stood before them, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. The symbols etched into the stones glowed faintly, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The air was colder here, and the oppressive feeling was stronger than ever. "This is a terrible idea," Ben muttered, but he followed the others into the clearing. Emma stepped cautiously toward the circle, her flashlight sweeping over the ground. The remnants of offerings, animal bones, charred wood, and feathers were scattered within the circle, their arrangement disturbingly deliberate. She knelt to inspect one of the stones, her fingers brushing over the glowing symbols. "What do you think it means?" Liam asked, standing beside her. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "But these markings, they feel like a warning. Or maybe a boundary." A sudden gust of wind extinguished their flashlights, plunging the clearing into darkness. Tara screamed, and the group huddled together, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Stay close," Emma shouted, fumbling to relight her flashlight. The whispers grew louder, their cadence shifting into something almost rhythmic, like a chant. When Emma's flashlight flickered back to life, she froze. The shadows at the edge of the clearing had solidified into figures, tall and indistinct, their forms rippling like smoke. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, fixed on the group. "What do we do?" Tara whispered, clutching Ben's arm. Emma swallowed hard, her mind racing. "We don't run," she said firmly. "That's what it wants." The largest figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The air around it seemed to shimmer, distorting the space like a heat wave. When it spoke, its voice was a low, guttural rasp that reverberated through the clearing. "You do not belong." Emma took a step forward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "We don't want any trouble," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We didn't mean to disturb this place." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You have trespassed," it said. "The forest remembers." "What does that mean?" Emma demanded, her frustration overriding her fear. "Why are you doing this?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised an arm, pointing toward the stone circle. The other figures began to close in, their movements unnatural and jerky, like marionettes on invisible strings. "Emma," Liam said urgently, "we need to do something. Now." Emma's gaze darted to the symbols on the stones. An idea began to form, desperate and uncertain. "The markings," she said. "They're some kind of ward. If we can strengthen them, maybe it'll push them back." "How do we do that?" Ben asked, his voice rising with panic. Emma looked at the remnants of the offerings scattered around the circle. "We make an offering." The group scrambled to gather anything they could use: salt from their food supplies, a lighter, a pocket knife, and a few scraps of wood. Emma worked quickly, arranging the items within the circle while the others kept watch. The figures had stopped their advance, standing just outside the boundary of the stones, their hollow eyes fixed on the group. Emma lit the wood, the small flame casting long, flickering shadows. She closed her eyes, her mind racing for the right words. "We're sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling. "We didn't mean to trespass. Please, let us go." The whispers grew louder, their cadence shifting into a deafening crescendo. The largest figure stepped forward, its form flickering like a dying flame. It raised its arm, pointing at Emma. "The forest decides." The flame within the circle flared brightly, illuminating the clearing. The figures recoiled, their forms rippling and distorting. The whispers ceased, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. Emma opened her eyes, her breath catching as the figures began to dissolve, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The largest figure lingered, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "Balance, restored," it said, its voice barely audible. Then it too vanished, leaving the clearing empty. The group stood in stunned silence, their breaths ragged and their bodies trembling. The oppressive atmosphere of the forest lifted, replaced by an eerie stillness. "Is it over?" Tara whispered, her voice breaking. Emma nodded slowly, though she wasn't entirely sure. "For now," she said. "But we need to leave." As they made their way back through the forest, the whispers did not follow. The trees seemed less menacing, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even as the first rays of dawn broke through the canopy. The forest had let them go, but it had not forgotten. The oppressive silence of the clearing was shattered only by the faint crackle of Emma's makeshift fire. The air felt heavy with tension, as if the forest itself were watching, waiting for their next move. The figures had retreated slightly, their hollow eyes glowing faintly from the shadows. It was a reprieve, but a fleeting one. Emma knew they had to act quickly. "We need a real plan," Liam said, his voice taut with urgency. "This, whatever this is, it's not going to let us leave without a fight." Emma's mind raced, her thoughts darting between the carvings, the symbols, and the words of the spectral figure. "The forest remembers. Balance must be restored." The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but she felt an answer forming at the edges of her understanding. "The symbols," she said, gesturing toward the stones. "They're warnings, but they're also protection. Whoever made them knew how to keep this thing at bay. If we can figure out what they did, we might stand a chance." Tara shook her head, her face pale and streaked with tears. "How? We don't know anything about this. We're just not helpless," Emma interrupted, her tone firm. "We're not helpless." She turned to Ben, who was clutching a sturdy branch as though his life depended on it. "Do you still have that notebook? The one you use for sketches?" Ben nodded, fumbling to pull it from his backpack. He handed it to Emma, who began sketching the symbols she had seen earlier, her hands moving quickly but precisely. As she worked, she spoke aloud, her voice steady and focused. "We need to recreate the circle. Not just the stones, but the entire ritual. Whatever was done here before, it worked, at least for a while." The group sprang into action, gathering materials from the remnants of the campsite. They worked in tense silence, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. Emma directed them with quiet authority, her mind laser-focused on the task at hand. "We'll need salt," she said, pointing to the packets they had brought for cooking. "Spread it around the circle. Thick lines. It's a natural deterrent." "What about the fire?" Liam asked, holding a bundle of kindling. "Do we need something stronger?" Emma nodded. "Yes. Use the firewood we have left. Build a large one in the center. If this thing fears light, we'll use it to keep it back." As Liam and Ben set to work on the fire, Emma turned to Tara. "Do you still have that bag of herbs you brought?" Tara nodded hesitantly, pulling a small pouch from her pack. "It's just rosemary and sage. For cooking." "Perfect," Emma said. "Burning those might help purify the space." As they worked, the figures began to move again, their forms flickering and shifting at the edges of the clearing. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, drilling into their minds like an invasive thought. "Hurry," Tara urged, her voice trembling. "They're getting closer." Emma forced herself to ignore the fear clawing at her chest. She focused on the symbols, carefully carving them into the dirt with a pocket knife. Each line felt heavy with significance, as though the act of creating them connected her to something ancient and powerful. "Almost there," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Keep going." The fire roared to life, its flames leaping high into the air and casting long, flickering shadows. The light seemed to push back the figures, forcing them to retreat slightly. The whispers faltered, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. "It's working," Ben said, his voice tinged with hope. "I think it's working." But Emma wasn't so sure. The largest figure stepped forward, its form more solid than the others. Its glowing eyes fixed on her, and she felt a wave of cold wash over her, sapping her strength. "Balance," it rasped, its voice like the grinding of stone. "Must be restored." Emma's mind raced. The circle, the symbols, the offerings, it wasn't enough. Something was missing. She glanced at the stones, her eyes catching on the remnants of the earlier offerings: animal bones, charred wood, feathers. An idea began to take shape, desperate and uncertain. "We need to make an offering," she said, her voice urgent. "Something meaningful." "Like what?" Liam asked, his grip tightening on his makeshift weapon. Emma hesitated, her gaze falling on the pocket knife in her hand. "It has to be personal," she said finally. "Something that matters." Without waiting for a response, she pressed the blade against her palm, wincing as it broke the skin. Blood welled up, dripping onto the ground within the circle. The air seemed to shift, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. "Are you crazy?" Tara exclaimed, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" "Trust me," Emma said, her voice steady. "This is how we show it we're serious." The growl deepened, and the figure took another step forward. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the fire flickered dangerously. Emma closed her eyes, focusing on the symbols she had drawn and the words she had heard. "We seek forgiveness," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We didn't mean to trespass. Please, let us go." The whispers grew louder, their cadence shifting into something almost melodic. The figures began to dissolve, their forms breaking apart like smoke in the wind. The largest figure lingered, its glowing eyes fixed on Emma. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as though weighing her words. Finally, it spoke, its voice a low rumble. "Balance, restored." The fire flared brightly, illuminating the clearing in a blinding light. When it dimmed, the figures were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The forest was silent once more, but it was a peaceful silence, free of the earlier menace. Emma sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. The others gathered around her, their faces pale but relieved. "Is it over?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. Emma nodded slowly. "For now," she said. "But we need to get out of here." As they made their way back through the forest, the first rays of dawn began to break through the canopy. The whispers were gone, but the memory of them lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's events. The forest had let them go, but Emma knew it would never truly forget. The clearing that had been their tenuous sanctuary felt like a distant memory as the group ventured into the heart of the forest. Emma led the way, her flashlight slicing through the suffocating darkness. The air grew colder with every step, each breath forming mist that curled and dissipated like phantom whispers. Around them, the shadows thickened, forming shapes that seemed to watch their every move. The forest had become an entity unto itself, alive and bristling with malevolence. "It's here," Tara whispered, clutching Liam's arm as they followed closely behind Emma. Her eyes darted nervously between the looming trees. "I can feel it watching us." "We all can," Liam muttered, his grip tightening on his makeshift weapon. "Stay close. Don't get separated." The whispers returned, low and insidious, curling around their ears like smoke. The cadence was different now, almost rhythmic, as though the forest itself were chanting. Emma's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. The stone circle was behind them now, The murmurer had forced them deeper into its domain, and every instinct screamed that they were walking into a trap. The group came to a halt at the edge of a large clearing. At its center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its twisted branches clawing at the sky. The bark was blackened and cracked, and glowing symbols identical to those on the stones covered its trunk. The air around it shimmered, distorting like heat waves. "That has to be it," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The source." "The murmurer's lair," Liam added grimly. A sudden gust of wind extinguished their flashlights, plunging them into darkness. The whispers swelled, rising to a deafening crescendo that made them clutch their heads in pain. And then, the murmurer emerged. It stepped from the shadows like a wraith, its form both human and inhuman. Tall and emaciated, it moved with a jerky, unnatural grace. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and its mouth, too wide and filled with jagged teeth, curled into a grotesque grin. The whispers emanated from it, spilling into the air like a tangible force. "Leave," it hissed, its voice a guttural rasp that seemed to echo from all around them. "You do not belong." Emma stepped forward, her legs trembling but her resolve firm. "We didn't mean to disturb you," she said, her voice shaking. "We just want to leave." The murmurer tilted its head, its grin widening. "The forest remembers. It demands balance." The murmurer lunged, its movements impossibly fast. The group scattered, Emma grabbing Tara and pulling her to the side as the creature's clawed hand swiped through the air where they had just been standing. Liam and Ben darted in opposite directions, their flashlights flickering as they stumbled through the dense underbrush. Emma and Tara ducked behind a fallen log, their breaths ragged as they tried to stay silent. The whispers grew louder, the cadence shifting into a mocking laughter. Emma peeked over the log, her heart racing as she saw the murmurer stalking through the clearing, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. "It's hunting us," Tara whispered, her voice trembling. "We're going to die here." "No," Emma said firmly, gripping Tara's hand. "We're not. We're going to end this." She pulled the talisman she had found in the stone circle from her pocket, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols as the tree. "This has to mean something," she said, her mind racing. "The symbols, the offerings, it's all connected." Across the clearing, Liam and Ben had regrouped, crouched behind a cluster of rocks. Ben clutched his branch, his knuckles white. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice shaking. Liam's eyes narrowed as he watched the murmurer move. "We distract it. Give Emma time to figure out whatever she's planning." Ben nodded, though his fear was palpable. Together, they stood and shouted, their voices cutting through the whispers. The murmurer's head snapped toward them, its hollow eyes narrowing. It let out an ear-piercing screech and charged. Liam and Ben bolted, weaving through the trees as the creature pursued them. Its movements were erratic but terrifyingly fast, its limbs bending in unnatural ways as it closed the distance. Emma seized the opportunity, dragging Tara toward the ancient tree. The symbols on its trunk pulsed faintly, as if reacting to their presence. Emma pressed the talisman against the bark, the glowing symbols aligning perfectly. A surge of energy rippled through the air, and the whispers faltered. "What are you doing?" Tara asked, her voice frantic. "Trying to stop it," Emma replied, her hands trembling as she traced the symbols. "This tree, it's the key." The ground beneath them shook as the murmurer let out another screech. Emma turned to see it standing in the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Liam and Ben had managed to distract it for only a moment, and now it was coming for her. "Emma!" Liam shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Do something." Emma closed her eyes, focusing on the talisman and the symbols. She whispered a prayer she didn't fully understand, the words spilling from her lips like an incantation. The tree began to glow brighter, its light pushing back the darkness. The murmurer lunged, its claws outstretched. At the last moment, the light from the tree flared, enveloping the clearing in a blinding radiance. The creature let out a final, bone-chilling scream as its form dissolved into the light, its whispers fading into silence. When the light dimmed, the clearing was empty. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by an almost eerie calm. The forest was silent once more, but it was a peaceful silence. Emma sank to the ground, her strength spent. The others gathered around her, their faces pale but filled with relief. "Is it over?" Tara asked, her voice trembling. Emma nodded, clutching the talisman tightly. "For now," she said. "But we need to leave." As they made their way back through the forest, the first rays of dawn began to break through the canopy. The whispers were gone, but the memory of them lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's events. The forest had let them go, but Emma knew it would never truly forget. The golden light of dawn spilled over the horizon, illuminating the once menacing forest with a warm, tranquil glow. The oppressive weight that had clung to the group during the night seemed to dissipate with the sunrise, but the tension in their shoulders and the haunted look in their eyes betrayed the lingering fear. Emma, Liam, Tara, and Ben trudged silently through the forest, their footsteps crunching against the carpet of fallen leaves. They were alive, but the events of the night had left an indelible mark on each of them. Emma walked ahead of the group, clutching the talisman tightly in her hand. It was cool to the touch now, its glow extinguished, but she couldn't bring herself to let it go. It had been their lifeline in the face of something unthinkable, and though the forest seemed calm now, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. The murmurer's presence was gone, but the forest had a way of remembering. Behind her, Tara limped slightly, leaning on Ben for support. Her ankle was swollen from their frantic escape, but she didn't complain. Her gaze darted nervously to the trees, as if expecting the shadows to come alive again. Ben murmured quiet reassurances, though his own voice trembled with residual fear. Liam brought up the rear, his makeshift weapon still clutched tightly in his hand. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. The fight with the murmurer had left him shaken, but a grim determination had taken root within him. They had survived, but he knew the forest held more secrets than they could comprehend. They reached the trailhead just as the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the bone-chilling cold of the night. The sight of their parked car was a welcome relief, but the group hesitated before approaching it. The mundane normalcy of the vehicle felt out of place after the surreal horrors they had faced. Emma turned to the others, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "We made it," she said, her words more a statement of disbelief than celebration. Tara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't think we would." Not after. Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, unable to finish the thought. Ben placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're safe now," he said, though his gaze lingered on the tree line. "At least, I think we are." Liam stepped forward, his expression grim. "We need to tell someone about this," he said. "The markings, the whispers, the thing we saw. People need to know what's out here." Emma shook her head. "Who would believe us?" she asked. "We barely understand what happened ourselves. If we go to the authorities with this, they'll think we're crazy. So what do we do?" Tara asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "Just forget this ever happened." Emma's grip on the talisman tightened. "No," she said firmly. "We don't forget. But we also don't draw more people into this. The forest let us go, but that doesn't mean it's safe. We need to respect it and make sure others do too." Back in civilization, the group parted ways with promises to stay in touch, though none of them were certain they could truly move on from what they had experienced. Emma returned to her apartment, the talisman a constant presence on her desk. She spent hours researching folklore and legends, piecing together fragments of knowledge about the murmurer and the ancient rituals tied to the forest. Her findings were both fascinating and chilling. The symbols she had seen were part of a protective warding practice used by indigenous tribes to keep vengeful spirits at bay. The offerings, the carvings, and the talisman were all pieces of a puzzle that had been disrupted, a balance that had been broken. Emma started a journal, documenting every detail of their ordeal. She wrote not just for herself, but for anyone who might stumble upon it in the future. It was her way of preserving the truth, even if she couldn't share it publicly. The forest's secrets were dangerous, and she was determined to honor its warnings. For Tara, the experience left deeper scars. She avoided the outdoors, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Nightmares plagued her, filled with hollow eyes and whispers that refused to fade. Ben stayed by her side, his own fear tempered by a need to protect her. Together, they found solace in each other, though the shadows of the forest lingered in their minds. Liam channeled his fear into action. He took up hiking and survival training, determined never to feel so helpless again. He ventured into other forests, testing his limits and learning their secrets, but he never returned to the woods near the stone circle. That place was sacred in a way he couldn't fully explain, and he respected its boundaries. Months later, Emma received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "The forest remembers." Attached was a photo of the stone circle, its symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. Beneath the image was a single sentence, "You were lucky. Don't come back." Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She didn't recognize the sender, and the email contained no other information. But the message was clear. The forest's balance had been restored, but it was a fragile piece, one that demanded respect. She closed the email and turned to her journal, adding the new information. The talisman rested beside her, its surface worn but still faintly etched with the symbols that had saved them. She ran her fingers over it, her thoughts drifting back to the clearing, the murmurer, and the whispers that had haunted them. The forest had let them go, but Emma knew it would never truly forget. And neither would she.